When news broke that Ghanaian traders had been attacked in northern Burkina Faso, shockwaves rippled across West Africa. Families mourned, markets fell silent. Communities that depend on cross-border trade felt a sudden wave of fear and uncertainty in a region where livelihoods are closely tied to open movement and shared commerce. The incident struck at something deeper than economics. It struck at trust. West Africa has already been navigating political transitions, security challenges, and rising tensions in parts of the Sahel, so when reports of the attack surfaced, many saw it as another painful chapter in a difficult period. But what happened next transformed the moment into something larger. Burkina Faso's leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, did not deliver a routine diplomatic statement. He did not limit his remarks to law enforcement or border control measures. Instead, he framed the attack as a broader challenge, not just a criminal act, not just terrorism, but a test of regional unity and solidarity. By elevating the narrative beyond the immediate tragedy, he shifted the political conversation and set the stage for a response that would resonate far beyond northern Burkina Faso, shaping dialogue across the continent. On February 14th, a group of Ghanaian traders traveling through northern Burkina Faso was ambushed while moving along a route commonly used for cross-border commerce. These traders were not political actors, they were small-scale businesspeople who regularly crossed borders to buy and sell agricultural produce, especially tomatoes, helping supply local markets in Ghana while strengthening informal regional trade networks that many communities depend on. The attack left several people dead and others injured. Survivors later described scenes of confusion, fear, and chaos. What began as a routine commercial journey quickly turned into a tragedy that shocked families on both sides of the border. The economic consequences were immediate. Trade flows slowed as transporters reassessed security risks. In parts of Ghana, produce prices surged due to supply disruptions. Market vendors worried about shortages, and cross-border traders questioned whether routes they had used for years were still safe. But beyond the economic impact, the incident took on symbolic weight. For many, it was not just an attack on individuals, it felt like an attack on regional cooperation itself. In a region where trade binds communities together, violence along those corridors threatens more than commerce, it threatens trust and shared stability. Within hours of the reports emerging, Burkina Faso's military leadership announced the launch of a security operation in the affected region. Specialized units were deployed to stabilize key transit routes, patrols were reinforced, surveillance measures intensified in vulnerable border zones. Authorities also signaled increased cross-border intelligence coordination, aiming to prevent further disruptions and track those responsible. The speed of the response was designed to send a message: the state was in control. Captain Ibrahim Traoré later addressed the nation, outlining three central priorities. First, security must be restored swiftly to protect civilians and commercial activity. Second, regional solidarity must be preserved, especially with neighboring Ghana and other West African partners. Third, armed networks responsible for violence would be pursued through lawful and structured means. His tone was firm, but measured, rather than framing the incident in purely emotional terms. He emphasized stability, sovereignty, and cooperation. The government sought to reassure traders, neighboring states, and citizens that trade corridors would not be abandoned to insecurity. The underlying message was unmistakable: instability would not be allowed to fracture West African trade, nor weaken regional unity. In the face of ongoing security challenges, northern Burkina Faso lies within the Sahel, a vast, semi-arid belt stretching across West Africa that has experienced years of insurgent violence and cross-border instability. Armed groups linked to extremist networks have operated across porous frontiers connecting Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, taking advantage of difficult terrain and limited state presence in remote areas. These groups often move fluidly across borders, complicating national security responses. What begins as a localized incident can quickly evolve into a regional concern. As a result, security in the Sahel is rarely confined to one country. It is deeply interconnected. The attack on the Ghanaian traders reignited long-standing debates across the region. How effective are current border control mechanisms? To what extent does foreign militant infiltration contribute to local instability? Are regional security frameworks strong enough to respond collectively? What role should international partners play in supporting or shaping counterterrorism efforts for Traoré's government? The response was not only about addressing a single violent episode, it was about reinforcing a broader political narrative. Since taking leadership, he has positioned himself as focused on sovereignty, security reform, and reducing reliance on external military frameworks. His administration has emphasized rebuilding domestic security capacity and strengthening national control over territory. That means moments like this carry weight beyond immediate law enforcement. They test credibility, they test strategy, and they test the government's ability to deliver stability in one of the world's most complex security environments. Days after the attack, security forces announced a series of arrests connected to the ambush. Officials stated that preliminary investigations suggested links between the suspects and transnational extremist networks operating across parts of the Sahel. According to authorities, intelligence operations uncovered alleged recruitment pipelines, cross-border movements, and possible foreign connections that extended beyond a single locality. The government framed these findings as evidence that the incident was not random, but part of a broader security challenge facing the region. The suspects were subsequently brought before military courts, marking a formal transition from emergency response to judicial process. Officials emphasized that the proceedings would follow established legal structures under national law. Captain Ibrahim Traoré publicly underscored the importance of due process, describing the trials as African justice through African institutions. The phrasing carried symbolic weight, reinforcing his broader message about sovereignty and institutional independence. At that point, the narrative shifted. The focus was no longer solely on retaliation or immediate security measures. It became about state authority, it became about legal sovereignty, and ultimately, it became about demonstrating that the government could assert control, not just through force, but through structured, institutional accountability. In Ghana, government officials expressed condolences to the families affected and called for continued cooperation between the two nations. Public statements emphasized the importance of maintaining strong diplomatic ties and ensuring that justice was pursued through coordinated efforts. Diplomatic channels remained open. Rather than escalating tensions, both governments signaled a willingness to collaborate on investigations and border security. Communication between security agencies intensified, reflecting a shared understanding that instability along trade corridors affects both sides. Community leaders in border regions also stepped forward, urging calm and unity. Religious figures, market associations, and civil society representatives encouraged citizens not to allow fear to damage long-standing social and economic relationships. Some trader associations briefly considered temporary import restrictions as a protective measure. However, both governments moved quickly to prevent long-term disruption to commerce. Recognizing the deep interdependence of their markets, soon images of solidarity began circulating online. Flags of Ghana and Burkina Faso appeared side by side in posts promoting unity and resilience. Messages emphasized cooperation over division, partnership over panic. The broader narrative began to shift. The message was clear: regional ties are stronger than terror attempts. Violence may seek to divide communities, but sustained cooperation and shared economic interests can reinforce stability rather than fracture it. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this moment reinforced the core pillars of his political messaging: security first, sovereignty first, African coordination first. Supporters viewed the government's response as decisive and aligned with his broader commitment to restoring territorial control and strengthening domestic institutions. They saw it as proof that leadership would act swiftly when national stability and regional trade were threatened. Critics, however, questioned whether short-term security operations address deeper structural challenges. They raised concerns about long-term stability strategies, cross-border coordination, and sustained economic recovery. But one reality became undeniable. The Sahel is no longer just a security story, it is a geopolitical story: control over territory, control over borders, control over economic corridors. Each of these elements is interconnected, shaping not only national politics but the regional balance of power itself. The Sahel occupies a critical geographic position between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. It serves as a bridge, linking Atlantic-facing trade routes with inland corridors that connect toward the Red Sea and beyond. Because of this location, instability in the Sahel does not remain isolated. It affects cross-border commerce, transport networks, and broader regional supply chains. What happens in remote border zones can ripple outward into major markets. That is why incidents like this carry weight far beyond a single headline. They influence investor confidence in regional stability, diplomatic alignments between neighboring states, military cooperation models and security partnerships, Pan-African political narratives about sovereignty and unity. In such a strategically sensitive region, leadership responses are not just domestic decisions, they become signals to the continent and the wider world. The attack on Ghanaian traders was a tragedy. Lives were lost. Families were changed forever. Communities that rely on trust and open borders were shaken, but the aftermath revealed something larger than the incident itself. It exposed a region wrestling with persistent security challenges. It highlighted a government determined to assert authority, and it showed a continent actively debating how to protect its interests in a shifting global order. Whether one views Captain Ibrahim Traoré as a reformer, a strongman, or a transitional leader, this moment demonstrated how quickly security events can evolve into symbols of broader political transformation in the Sahel. The struggle is not only against armed groups operating across porous borders, it is also a struggle over stability, sovereignty, and the future direction of West Africa. And as regional dynamics continue to evolve, that story, complex, contested, and consequential, is still unfolding.